All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the House Education Committee. It is 1:30 on the dot. Hooray for us starting on time. Committee, we got 3 hearings to do today and 1 bill as of right now. So with that, we're going to jump right on into a hearing on House Bill 2719, and I will look to our reviser, Jason Long, to give us a rundown. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, House Bill 2719 amends the statute in the Student Data Privacy Act. KSA 72-6316 prohibits the administration of non-academic tests, questionnaires, surveys, or examinations on the personal attitudes, values, beliefs, or practices of a student or their family unless there is prior notice and consent before administering those non-academic tests, questionnaires, etc. The notice must be provided to the student's parent or legal guardian, including a copy of the test, questionnaire, etc., information on how the parent may provide written consent, the name of the company that is providing the test questionnaire, and an explanation of whether the school will retain the resulting data, and if so, how it will be used by the school. Under current law, that notice has to be provided not more than 4 months prior to administration of the test, questionnaire, or examination. Under 2719, the bill would extend that time period, giving school districts up to 6 months prior to administration to notify parents and get written consent back to administer that test or questionnaire. The bill also adds a new provision to the statute regarding these non-academic tests, etc., that are intended to screen a student to identify whether the student is at risk for a social emotional behavior problem. The bill also provides that if the student is identified as being in the low or medium range of at risk for a social emotional behavior problem, then the school district must provide direct communication to the parent or legal guardian not more than 60 days following administration of that test. If the student is determined to be high risk for a social emotional behavior problem, then the school district must make direct contact with the parent or legal guardian not more than 30 days following administration of the test. And direct contact means in-person communication, telephonic communication, or video conference communication as described in the bill. These changes will go into effect on July 1st. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jason. Committee questions for the reviser? Stellar, sir. Thank you. All right, with that, we'll open the proponent side of things. I will welcome Linda Highland. Welcome to our committee.
Thank you, Chairman Thomas and Vice Chair Estes and Minority Lead. Thank you so much for having me here today. Can you hear me? Okay, thanks. Well, I'm here today in support of this with some changes. The Student Data Privacy Bill was very needed back in 2014 when it was first introduced. It was amended in 2021, and at that time, it was added that parents would see certain tests and surveys. This screening of behaviors of students at risk of certain behaviors, I would be very much against that amendment to this bill. Today, I would like to show you, many of you I have not visited with before, but I would like to show you my reasons. And if you would look to the Kansas Communities That Care survey, this is the document that first brought me into this journey of looking into education. Since this bill was first introduced, there are 4 modules that have been added to this survey. And if you could look at those, I will start with, there's a gender identity module, so you're asked to add that to the survey. Sexual orientation, the one that really gets to me is the one on suicide. Many times in the school day, we're focusing on suicide, and we're asking children these questions. Have you ever seriously thought about killing yourself? Have you ever made a plan to kill yourself, and have you tried? And all of that. I will let you know that there's a middle school in Kansas, I didn't include this, but I brought it with me, that actually asks students to plan their funerals. So, and since SEL has been introduced in Kansas schools, suicide is the second leading cause of death among our youth. Before SEL was introduced, it was not a leading cause at all. So to go on with this Kansas, the Communities That Care survey, I would like you to look at page 6. And there you will see the question, in your lifetime, how many occasions have you, and absolutely every possible drug is listed there. Now, I want you to keep in mind that these are 6th graders taking this test, 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th graders. It's the same test for all. And so you fully identified youth in all possible drugs. Then if you turn to page 15 and 16, you'll see other things they're asking them. 6th grader, if they're playing the lottery, if they're betting, how many in your household are gambling, is that going on? We talk about handguns. Are you stealing a car? Have you been arrested? Are you drunk when you come to school? How many times are you fighting? How are you stealing? Now, let's go on to the next survey. And these two surveys, the Student Data Privacy Bill assures that all parents will be shown this, and they will agree whether a child will take it. So if you look at the CDC survey, on page 5, they go into guns. On page 7, we're talking about rape. Many questions on suicide on page 8. Then you move on to 13. Now they're getting into drug usage. But the one that really gets to me, too, is on page 15, where they start a number of questions asking children about their intercourse habits. Then there's a third survey that the Student Data Privacy Bill catches, and that is a family community knowledge survey. That was pretty lengthy. The reason I added this to my testimony is that I feel this is divisive too. It's not talking about community, it's more about, it's talking about spiritual things, it's talking about groups, ethnic, social, gender. It's separating people into groups, wanting you to think about your group. But also, please note that it's selling a product here that has a whole list of how much the school district can pay to give this survey. So yes, social emotional learning is about a lot of products that are sold to schools. Some can be even $1 million for one specific survey. I would like to also bring notice of legislation that protects families and children. If you would look to the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment, and in that, this I got from the U.S. Department of Education. So this says, this is Orrin Hatch's bill, this says that consent before students are required to submit to a survey, if you're asking questions on politics, mental or psychological problems, right there, your amendment to this bill should not be happening just based on this federal law. Sexual behavior, illegal, antisocial, demeaning behavior, It goes on and on. Religion, can't have religion going on there. So there's that bill that we should be aware of. Then I would like you to look at the Kansas legislation on biometric data. This says you will not ask questions on a student's emotional state. So please do not do this amendment to this bill. I'm begging you. Also, at the end of my testimony, I introduced another idea about who was behind social emotional learning in the beginning. And I gave you a copy of what the Fetzer Institute says. The Fetzer Institute helped to form CASEL, which is what the schools are all listening to. That's who they're listening to. And it says the curricula that contributes to the spiritual dimension of the whole child. At the bottom it says, and they are working to add pluralistic spiritual development into the whole child curricula. That's the reference to whole school, whole community, whole child. So I want to end on a positive note. I added to the testimony a program that a school uses. A counselor in our county alerted me to the Medal of Honor Character Development Program. Until such time as Kansas in social emotional learning as the main curriculum in our schools that is put in place and assured by accreditation, there are some good programs that we could look to, and this was one. It's free to the district, and I would encourage you to support this. And I also added the 8th grade final exam in 1895, what we were learning in the 8th grade in Kansas. So that completes my testimony, and I thank you, and I stand for questions.
Committee questions? Representative Estes.
Thank you for being here today. It's nice to see you again. I'm confused because I thought you were testifying as a proponent, but then you said...
I didn't know this last amendment was on the bill, the behavioral assessment of antisocial behavior or whatever. I am not in favor of that amendment, that change to this legislation. So I guess you would say I'm neutral. I'm here defending that bill that was put in place in 2022. So I guess you would say I'm changing to be an opponent of this bill. Changes. I apologize for that.
Thank you.
Committee, further questions? Representative Getz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The question on which amendment are you referring to? Just checking to make sure we're tracking.
The one that you introduced to assess at-risk behaviors. That is what Mr. Long just read to you.
Jason, would you be able to explain?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I believe the conferee is referring on page 2, starting in line 25, the new subsection F language regarding tests, questionnaires, et cetera, intended to screen a student to identify whether such student is at risk for social emotional behavior problems.
Yeah, because this is the purpose of this bill. When I met with the counselors, just to explain a little bit of the background, they wanted to go to 1 time a year permissions from parents, and I said that's probably too much. At least each semester, I'll work with you on that. But then some of the, honestly, what you're testifying to, some of the fear around what is being asked and what is being reported back to parents, and the counselors were the ones that I met with. They wanted to open up lines of communication better and have more authority to, if a kid is high risk from these tests, to be able to get in contact with the parents, because they were having some districts were wanting to, they weren't saying don't report it, they were saying wait. They were saying let's collect more information and at parent-teacher conferences or at a certain time share this information. And the counselors wanted to move it to a place of quicker authority that they had to reach out to the parents if a kid was high risk.
Yeah. Chairman Thomas, may I answer?
Yes, please.
Okay. The legislation says that each survey will be shown separately, and there'll be a separate acceptance of that if the child is to take it. And I didn't highlight in my testimony, which you read, I'm calling for also getting out non-academic, striking that word in this bill. In other words, it would say no tests, survey, behavioral assessment, all of that. So that would get at, since 2022, many more assessments are being done within the school day that I feel very strongly the parent needs to know about. And you have one testimony written to you that explains such an incident. Thank you.
Very good. Further questions, committee? All right, that closes initially the proponent side of things.
Thank you.
I have multiple written proponents. Was there anybody else appearing today as oral proponent? Seeing none, very good. We will go to the neutral. And with that, I will welcome your friend and mine, Leah Fleiter from Kansas Association of School Boards. Welcome.
Vice Chair, members of the committee, thank you, Tech Genius, and sorry, my iPad has dropped my copy of my testimony. One moment. Sorry about that. So we are here, as you know, as neutral on 2719, and here are the reasons why, as my file loads. Sorry about that. Okay. The spinning circle of doom. I apologize, committee.
That's all right.
So we certainly support changes to the underlying statute. We appreciate lengthening the time to 6 months. We would actually advocate for just letting the notification and the permission to take place at registration and enrollment in the fall. But our larger concern is, while our members strongly support this particular change of going to the extended time, we have very strong and specific recommendations for changes that should be made to the statute in order to best serve kids. So I try not to read my testimony, Mr. Chair, but I would like to give some examples, and then you just tell me when to stop talking. So let's consider a specific example of successful intervention prior to this law being adopted in 2022. A district took part in KDHE's Project Echo vaping project, and they used a survey, and they found out that 30% of their middle schoolers were already vaping. This is kids who are in 7th and 8th grade. Representative Miller, I know, and they were like, really? Because they weren't aware of that either. They didn't know, they knew they had a problem, but they didn't know it was that significant. And so they were able to really do a lot of investment on vaping prevention. Now, under the 2022 law, they cannot collect that information. Okay, so that's a concern. We note in our testimony that federal law already provides protections to families in this area, and so I won't read that. If a full repeal of the 2022 law is not a consideration, then we would suggest some revisions. We get a little bit detailed there. My bullet points there, starting at the bottom of, sort of the bottom of page 2. There's conflicting language in page 1 on lines 30 to 32, page 2, line 17, 18, and the proposed new language on lines 25 through 42. So lots of concerns there about how the bill is written. We also have some concerns on page 2, lines 14 through 16, has resulted in some copyright issues for everybody involved and has prevented districts from using some important tools. And we know that the concern is parents want to have access to these tools to review them in advance, so we would suggest a revision, as I note in my testimony. Specifically regarding suicide screeners, The process described in the law, you can see my testimony on page 3, the first bullet point on page 3. The process described in the law is cumbersome and does not support student safety in these circumstances. When a child is in crisis, time may be of the essence in evaluating the child's safety. We request the committee consider amending lines 9 to 22 on page 3 to allow districts to make a reasonable attempt to notify a parent or guardian and obtain consent prior to giving a screener, and then allow the staff to follow up with the parent or guardian afterwards. And while relettered section G does allow suicide screeners, it does not allow districts to follow the same process for threat assessment screening. So, when a student might be a danger, not to themselves, but to others. So we would suggest a threat assessment screener should be included along with suicide screeners in this section. So, and then finally, on page 2, section B, the bill says that even if a district obtains the required parent consent, a student could refuse to take any of these tools, including the suicide screeners or the threat assessment tools. So we suggest this language be removed or at least modified to require participation when safety or security are implicated. So thank you for this opportunity to provide input. I know it was somewhat detailed, and I'm happy to stand for questions if I can answer them.
I'm going to go ahead and ask you to stop talking since you told me to tell you.
Okay, thank you.
You were done anyway, so it's
I
fine.
was.
All right, questions for the conferee committee? I see Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here again.
Sure.
So good to see you just about every day in here.
Thank you.
So I was looking at the surveys while the previous conferee was speaking about them. I noticed that they all say that they are anonymous and that none of the names are going to be tied to the test. How does that work with? How would that? And I guess to your understanding, how would that work with the new language added to? Be given a certain time frame to report to the parents what the results of the test are if there's no names assigned to the test. How would that work?
That is a very good question, honestly.
Maybe, is that a revisor question?
It might be. Jason is like, what?
Mr. Chairman, if the name of the student cannot be recorded as part of the survey or test, I don't see how the district could report to the student's parent or legal guardian.
So I guess that raises a larger question that what would we do with these results aside from just having a district-wide or school-wide kind of standard anonymous result? We would know we would have at-risk students, but if it's anonymous, how would we know which of those students are at risk?
I think the specific knowledge of specific students comes through interactions with the counselors. And then the concern is then that the counselors, as Representative Getz noted, the people that he spoke with, said that they felt that their hands were tied about talking to the parents about the fact that their child might be at risk for self-harm. I know when the bill was enacted in 2022, then when the fall school year started, so 22-23 school year, we started immediately hearing concerns from people because, okay, this law has been handed down and it's quite a different process that we're used to, and people were afraid to break the law because they don't want to break the law. But, they had serious concerns about some of the students that they are trying to serve. As a parent who got that dreaded phone call about an 8th grader who had a plan, and to this day, I can't forgive myself because I had my phone turned off because I was eating lunch with a friend. Thank God, the school, thank goodness, little friend Isaac, who's now, 26 years old, went to the principal contacted the school social worker called me, mom of the year. I had my phone turned off. They called my husband. He hit the road, and then, we both got there. So I have some knowledge of this, and I will tell you that screeners do not put thoughts of suicide in anyone's mind, So I'm sorry if I got us sidetracked there. I just, sometimes we get a little bit theoretical in committee, and I just wanted to add that personal detail. So the concern, okay, so if we have the anonymous surveys, that can tell us, okay, we have kids who are vaping. We have a lot of kids who might have access to, their older siblings, Adderall, that's something we hear about. Or, the kids are smoking their parents' weed, okay? So that's general things that we know to be aware of. And then the issues that the counselors had was, I'm meeting with a student and they are saying, as my child did, I can't take it anymore. I'm going to go home and slit my wrist. Those counselors felt in the immediate aftermath of the 2022 law that they had to not call my husband and me. That would have been their fear at that early point.
Further questions, Representative Partial.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is, if the data is confidential and nobody knows who the student is that fills it out, when my son came home and told me he took a test, which he was opted out of, how did the counselor then come and tell me, I'm just going to go ahead and erase his results?
I'm sorry, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't,
Like,
I don't know the logistics.
That's one of my biggest questions there.
Right.
Further questions, committee? Representative Getz.
So I think there are, from my information, the Sabres test.
Okay.
That has a name attached
Okay.
to the kid, correct?
I believe so. I'm sorry, I'm not an expert on
That's okay.
screeners.
Getting an email from one of the conferees that helped with the drafting of this, because this would be for only screeners that names are attached
Okay.
to the child. So and they are actually, some of the surveys that were provided in another testimony, they don't have names attached.
Okay.
So we're not really dealing with those for this one. These are, the Sabres test gets used by about 75% of schools.
Okay.
And that one, a name is attached, and it's actually very broad questions. I meant to get a copy
Okay.
for every member, but I can email one out later. And so the issue then arose of they do have a name attached to a high-risk kid or a lower medium.
Right.
And we wanted to provide some clarity on how to follow up, what was that time frame, and when the parent was giving that permission, they were also giving their consent, or they were getting something in return of a specific time frame of when that test was
Right.
implemented, or that survey was
Right.
implemented.
So we could say, we gave this screener to your child on February 17th.
Yes. So this is actually very much specifically dealing with any test that their name is attached to.
Okay.
And those are not as many because of the new laws, but there are still some.
Sure.
And so this would provide some clarity on the follow-up and what the permission is providing. What the test is, what the questions are, still kind of the same stuff, but not an ambiguous test of like everybody, but a specific student. So, that may provide some more clarity around what this is trying to do in a very narrow fashion to those specific surveys.
Well, I think we would be more than happy to work with you and the committee to amend the bill to get at what we're trying to get at. I just know that our legal staff, almost from the time the bill took effect in 2022, was just deluged with calls from counselors and other school personnel saying, what am I allowed to do? I have a kid who I think is going to hurt themselves, or they, might be a threat to the rest of the school. And so, our testimony today is based on several very deep conversations with the folks who advise our school districts on how to handle these issues.
Yeah, I've got a example of a SABRS test in front of me right now. Just a minute. There's 7 things that are in front of me right now, and it just says arguing. Never, sometimes, often, always. But this is attached to a name.
Arguing in a, like, is there argument in your family? Is that what you're,
It's really just saying arguing, a social behavior. It says one word, arguing.
okay.
So to a kid. I'm just trying to see how general this is. Cooperative with peers. So are you cooperative with peers?
Oh, okay.
Temper outbursts, and it's never, sometimes, often.
Okay, I have a copy now. Thank you.
You know, so there's just this is actually a very general test, just asking a kid for their feedback, not about some of the suicide issues,
Mm-hmm.
not about anything tailored to sexuality, none of these kind
Right.
of hot-button political issues.
Right.
But
Right.
being able to, so part of my background was a youth pastor.
Sure.
And so I was engaged with the counselors at school, and I was a counselor myself to many students. And I agree that there's a process and a time frame and a mandatory reporter involved in things that go on. It would take quite a bit for a kid, I think, to come back as a high risk on this. But if they did, my thought when talking to the counselors was, let's create a clear way and time frame that on these ones that are named, they have a follow-up process that they need to adhere to out of respect for the child, out of respect for their profession, and out of respect to the student.
Right.
So
It sounds like we share that goal.
yeah, I think that.
So if we could continue conversations about this, about making the bill do what you want it to do and help us serve all the kids, I think that would be a great conversation to have.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for indulging me.
No problem. She gave me permission to tell y'all when to stop talking, so.
I don't have that kind of
Representative
power.
Estes.
Thank you, and thank you for being here. And I'm glad that you guys are taking the calls and clearing up the confusion, because there's nothing about what was ever passed that said, oh, you can't call a parent, and that you shouldn't call a parent. It was actually meant to strengthen a parent's role in these conversations. So I hope that message is getting filtered out. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, I would respectfully say that unfortunately, it was included as part of a large conference committee bill that also had a lot of other topics in it, and it was very hard for people to understand, and it took a while to get the information out, unfortunately. So thank you, and yeah, but it was very dicey there for a few weeks, because the parents and the counselors and the teachers were all kind of hitting the panic button, unfortunately.
And nothing stops a mandatory reporter from being a mandatory reporter.
Right, right, absolutely.
Representative Haskins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And really, Leah, this point of information more than anything, because I was just curious on the SABRE test. Are SABRE tests often used with IEPs?
I do not know, Representative. I'm sorry, I'm not a special ed expert.
And that's fine. And I don't know if my colleague over there who has all those tests, if he has any information on if SABRE tests are also used in an IEP program.
I would have to get back to you on
That's
that, but I would assume in cases where that they're capable, where the student is capable, they would use that.
Yeah, and so then the parents would be aware because the IEP is formed, and so it's just a question of curiosity. Thank you.
Very good. Further questions, committee? All right, very good. Thank you. Thank you for being here. That is all the oral testimony that I have on that bill. And with that, I will close the hearing on House Bill 2719. And now we will turn to House Bill 2703. And we will open the hearing on that. I will have our reviser give us a rundown of that one. Welcome back, Jason.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. House Bill 2703 deals with at-risk programs and services that are offered by school districts. In 2021, the legislature codified the criteria adopted by the State Board of Education for students who are eligible to receive at-risk programs and services. 2703 would add to that list the condition of being in foster care. So if a child is in the custody of the Secretary for Children and Families, they would be eligible to receive programs and services provided to at-risk students in their district that they are attending. This change will go into effect July 1st. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jason. Committee, questions? Very good. Seeing none, we will turn to the proponent section of 2703, and with that, I will turn to our colleague, Representative Estes.
Thank you very much. I happened to notice that this was missing off of the list of at-risk weightings, and I think there are probably certain factors about a child in the care of foster care that does get them flagged, but that may not be true for everyone, and I just wanted to make sure that we included all foster children. I will stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Very good. Further proponent testimony, I have Leah Fleiter with Kansas Association of School Boards. Welcome back.
Thank you. We are pleased to appear as a proponent on this bill. As always, our testimony is directed by our member-affirmed legislative policies, which state that we support improved collaboration across agencies and with the legislature to support educational outcomes for students in foster care or experiencing homelessness. And our permanent policies state that we support comprehensive programs to deal with students who are at risk of failing regular education programs, regardless of why the child is at risk. We know that students who are in DCF custody have many factors that put them at risk of failing in school. These include extreme mobility, inadequate family support, and mental health challenges. We applaud Representative Estes for requesting the bill and support the legislature specifying that students in DCF custody should be eligible for at-risk services. I think we can all agree that a child who is toting their belongings around in a black plastic trash bag has some strikes against them that are going to make it pretty hard for them to succeed in school and in life. And so we appreciate this, this proposal. But I cannot let this opportunity pass without expressing our grave concern about the future availability of at-risk funding in Kansas public schools. We strive mightily to equip our at-risk students with the knowledge and skills they need to overcome difficult circumstances. But conversations in other legislative committees indicate that at-risk funding and the flexibility districts need to use those funds to meet specific needs is in peril this session. We urge the committee to commit to working with us to ensure that children in DCF custody and all at-risk Kansas children receive the support they need to thrive and succeed. Thank you.
Very good. Questions from the committee?
Thank you.
Nothing? All right, very good. That is all the testimony I have for that bill. So we will close the hearing on that. Representative Estes.
I move that we go to emergency final action and pass this bill favorably.
I have a second from Representative Stogstill. Discussion on the bill, committee. Representative Ruiz.
I would ask the maker of the motion, thank you, Mr. Chair, if he would want this placed on the consent calendar.
I went back and forth on whether or not, because it might affect funding, if it would be appropriate. I would seek the advice of the chair.
I will turn to the reviser, Jason Long.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, this bill is subject to the deadline of turnaround, and if it's placed on a consent calendar, it must be there for 3 days before it can be advanced to final action, which could make it difficult to be advanced to final action before that turnaround deadline.
Answers my question. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Further discussion on the bill? All right. Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to pass the bill out favorably. Wait. So the motion on the table is to work the bill, so which does require 2/3 of the committee's vote. So those in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? I believe the motion passes. We're on the bill. Seeing no further discussion, the chair will entertain a motion.
I move that we pass this bill favorably.
You've heard the motion. I have a second from Representative Stogsdill. Seeing no further discussion, those in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Good, motion passes. With that, committee, we're going to open up the hearing on House Bill 2731, and I will turn back to our reviser, Jason Long, for a summary of the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. House Bill 2731 goes into the Education Statute 72-5170, which generally governs statewide assessments that are provided for by the State Board of Education. State Board provides these statewide assessments in core academic areas. The amendment to the statute appears on page 2 of the bill, starting in line 26. It would require the State Board each year to submit a report to the Legislature on students who took the statewide assessments. That report would include the following information: the number of students, both as a whole number and as a percentage of total number of students who took the statewide assessments in the immediately preceding school year. And that information would be broken down by core academic area and grade level. And then secondly, the percentage of students who took the statewide assessments in 10th grade and who 2 years after graduation obtained some post-secondary education. That information would be required to be broken down by statewide assessment achievement level. That report would also be required to be published on the Department of Education's website and would be incorporated in the school district performance accountability reports and longitudinal achievement reports that are already required under state law. These changes would go into effect on July 1st if enacted, and I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Committee questions for the reviser. Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jason. I just wanted to make sure that I heard you correctly. Did you say that it is already required that they post this online? Or is that what the bill is going to require?
The bill would do that. Since it's a new reporting requirement, the bill also has a new provision requiring this information to be published on the department website.
Thank you.
Further questions for the reviser? Seeing none, very good. With that, I will turn to the proponent testimony, which I have Dave Trobert from Kansas Policy Institute, who I believe is written only. All right, we will now close the proponent side of the testimony, unless there are other proponents that are here to testify orally. Oh, he's on WebEx. Okay, my apologies. All right, we have Dave here. I believe you need to unmute, Dave, and then the floor is yours.
I am here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. We're very pleased to be able to offer testimony in support of House Bill 2731. The state law requires the State Board of Education to adopt an accreditation system that's based on improvement in performance that equals or exceeds the goals set forth in statute, and it has to be measurable. Now, the court has indicated that that is at least level 2 on the state assessment, and they spell out what those assessments mean. Level 1 is kids who are not at grade level. Level 2 is grade level but not on track, and so forth. Levels 3 and 4 are on track. Knowing that, then the court said Kansas, and this is a quote, Kansas fails to provide nearly 1/4 of all its public school K-12 students with the basic skill of reading. Now, they were referencing the 2016 state assessment results that showed 24% of students below grade level in English language arts. 7 years later, and about a little more than $2 billion in increased funding, 33% of students are reading below grade level. Now, that's a stark decline that cannot be blamed on COVID, because it had declined to 29% below grade level in 2019. And yet, to our knowledge, the Department of Education and the State Board of Education haven't taken any accreditation action against school districts for not improving outcomes. We believe the evidence shows that the state board is not accrediting districts based on an improvement as required in statute, and there are multiple attempts to artificially inflate outcomes. Just last week, for example, the State Board of Education testified basically that every student is on track for college and career because the magic words academically prepared for post-secondary success is assigned to each level of the state assessment. And we know that's not true. In fact, ACT results showed that only 19% of students who took the 23 test were college ready in English, reading, math, and science. Now, we support the bill as written, but the propensity to give the legislature a false sense of high achievement underscores the importance of not just the legislature, but also local school board members and parents having access to this information. So we've proposed a few enhancements. If the committee would be so inclined, we'd like to see the levels very specifically stated as level 1 limited, level 2 basic, and levels 3 and 4 proficient. Also show the results for low income students, because the court also made a very large point, emphatic point about the growing achievement gaps, which now are worse. And so we would also finally encourage the committee to consider requiring this same information be published at the school district level and given to school board members, at least at the district level, if not also showing it by school. And with that, I will be happy to stand for questions.
Very good. And then I have one more proponent, Representative Susan Estes, who I believe sent in testimony, and we will get that out to everybody. But I will turn to my colleague for her proponent testimony.
So I apologize that everybody doesn't have my testimony. I've emailed my assistant and asked him to run some copies, and hopefully they will get here quickly. So this bill came to me because I have spent a lot of time this year going over what's available on the standardized test scores through the longitudinal portal, plus asking the State Department of Education for a lot of information for years that are no longer posted there. And I just want to compliment them because they've actually been very responsive and getting the information that I need. And as I looked at it, and I looked at what's in the longitudinal portal, what it really occurred to me is we talk about all of these things in percentages, and we don't have actual numbers attached to them, and it would be more meaningful if we had actual numbers there. So my testimony shows the longitudinal portal on the state's website, and what information there is what's clumsily described in the bill, because there just wasn't a better way to phrase it. And you see the different levels. You can break it down by building. You can break it down by at risk, by special education, and all of those things are very helpful, but they are strictly only reported in percentages. That in conjunction with the report that Commissioner Watson gave last year that talked about where students were 2 years after graduation was very enlightening and helpful to us, I believe, because he was able to break down the different performance levels and talk about what percentage of those students had gone on to post-secondary or some other career readiness, and that's ultimately what our goal is. So I wanted to have that report be one that we always get, because it is not the only, but a very good and important measure of what we are trying to accomplish, and adding actual real numbers will deepen our understanding of what we're doing. I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time.
All right. Are there any other proponents wishing to speak to the bill? Seeing none, committee questions for the proponents. Representative Haskins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Trabert, if I can ask you a couple questions, I would appreciate it.
Certainly.
Thank you for your testimony. I'm just, point of clarification, you're pretty specific on saying that students in Kansas are not on track for college and career. What was your justification and reference on that?
The original state assessment results or the levels were given to the legislature in 2015, and it very clearly stated that only levels 3 and 4 are considered on track for college and career, and that remains the definition at the Department of Education. When they look at their goal is based on getting 75% of students into levels 3 and 4, because that is college and career ready. It's what they tell the feds is proficient.
Thank you for that. And do all students take that assessment in Kansas?
Yes.
They do.
But parents can opt out, but basically all students do.
You also made reference to the fact that in your testimony, you stated that, sorry, something popped up, that only 19% of the Kansas graduates who took the ACT were considered college ready. What's the point with that?
The point is that clearly we do not have all students in Kansas on track for college and career, as would be implied by the Department of Education, or the State Board rather, excuse me, when they say that if the words are in the definition, then it means they're academically prepared for college. And those words are in every level. 100% of students are not college ready. ACT is the best example we have of that, where the 23 results showed that only 19% of students who took the ACT were considered college ready in English, reading, math, and science.
Thank you. How many states, universities require the ACT of all students?
I don't know that off the top of my head.
Okay, so the ACT is used as a standardized test to place students in the appropriate schools and programs, but that doesn't necessarily define if they're college ready. But even if we grant that, how do you determine if they're career ready?
The career ready is, again, it's college and career ready was the original definition used by the Department of Education and the State Board when they introduced these standards in 2015. That's their words, college and career ready.
So based on one assessment and the levels associated with the assessment, not factoring in the longitudinal information that the student gains throughout their education career, you're saying that the students in Kansas are not college and career ready. Is that correct?
Not 100%, as the State Board of Education testimony would imply.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Stogsdill.
Yes, this is directed towards Mr. Trabert. I hope I'm mistaken in this, but I was kind of offended by your characterization of the state school board. Are you saying that they are purposely being dishonest in their assessment and their submission of facts on the testing scores and so on? And what would be their impetus for doing that? I mean, to me, that was almost verging on character assassination.
Well, I can't read their minds as to what might guide their actions, but to say that students in level 2 are on track for college and career simply because academically prepared appears in that definition, then implies that every level that has those words is also on track for college and career. And that would be all 100% of students. And we know that cannot be true. We also know that the statute charges the Board of Education with creating an accreditation system based on improvement in outcomes. And we know that we have seen declines in outcomes. We saw declines in outcomes before COVID. And yet I know of not one district that has lost its accreditation because outcomes declined.
Yeah, I think that kind of went around my question. Are you saying that the State Board of Education and their members are purposely issuing dishonest information to the public and to this, to the legislature?
Not the entire board, but certainly some of them are. That's on the record. I gave one example in my testimony.
And do we have names of those people? Are you willing to do that? I mean, if it's, you know.
Oh, it's in my testimony, Ann Maw.
Right. Well,
Okay,
we'll
we're gonna,
disagree on that one.
committee, we're gonna pause for a minute. So we're gonna make sure that we're not impugning on anyone's reputation. I would like to not mention people by name and question their character. So we're gonna move on from this line of questioning, and we're gonna move on. Do we have any other questions, committee? Very good. Seeing none, I have no other proponents to list. So with that, I will turn to the opponents. I believe we have Ann Maw here today. Welcome to our committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee, and I'll be glad to address the misstatements that were made about my testimony last week when I'm done talking about this bill, because I think that needs to be addressed. When you're totally misquoted, you have to say something. But
Let's just stick to the bill.
well, it is the bill, and I'm going to present a chart that I think you'll find interesting and helpful in this regard. I want to thank you for allowing us to testify today in opposition to 2731. I know, Mr. Chair, last week you mentioned several times that sometimes bills are helpful, not necessarily because they become law, but because they start a conversation. And we hope that that's what this bill will do. As our testimony states, this bill is unnecessary, but it does allow us to start a conversation about which reports need to be in statute and which do not. Generally speaking, a report is put into statute when it's tied to a bill making some new education requirement. This bill seems to be about putting into statute a report of interest to a single entity. We've responded to about 40 requests already this session. None of them had to be put into statute, and we were more than happy to answer all those requests. As I also mentioned in our testimony, we don't have a problem with the report that's described in the bill. It is similar to the correlation data chart that I handed out. If you all have this, you could take a look. This is what I was talking about last week and seems to be similar to what's described in the bill. And what this does is it correlates, as described in the bill, academic achievement on the state assessments to other measures of success. As you know, the State Board has always said success of a student or a district is not how you do on one test on one day, but there are many measures of success. So what this chart does, and it's actually already provided to all the schools because they really like the way this is laid out. We've divided levels 1, 2, 3, and 4 into low and high, and we also show how their correlation on the assessments, whether they're in 1, 2, 3, or 4, relates to their percent of graduation, their ACT scores, and related to, and their post-secondary effectiveness, which is what is shown, requested in the bill. So we really like this chart. We like correlating assessment scores to other methods of achievement. And like I said, it's already available. So, but just to show the different levels of interest in this, I know that Dr. Proctor a few weeks ago tried to present this chart to the K-12 committee and was denied that opportunity to do it. But our staff comes up with new and interesting ways to look at things every year. This was new this year. And we've already talked about enhancing this report to show percent of students in poverty. How does that relate to assessment? Chronic absenteeism, mobility, all the things we know that are factors in student success. So next year, this thing is likely to look a lot different, more sophisticated. And then what happens to the report that's requested in the bill? Well, when you put a request like this into law, long after the requesters have left the building, our staff will be dutifully producing it every year into perpetuity for folks who don't even know why it was requested in the first place. So why do we need to go there? I also provided a list for you of all the reports that are already required for us to do in statute. I notice if it says legislature, those are generally delivered to House and Senate leadership, along with the clerks of the bodies, and others are directed to committees. I'm wondering how many of you have ever used any of these reports and yet our staff has to produce them every year because they're in law. We are more than happy to create for any of you any information that would be helpful. And like I said, we already provide this to the school districts because they know how helpful it is. But we don't need to have a bill. And we hope that maybe this bill will start a conversation about what kind of reports are helpful so we can produce those for you and do what's best for kids. And with that, I'll stand for questions.
Very good. Committee questions. Representative Estes.
Thank you, Board Member Ma, for being here. I appreciate it, and I appreciate the conversation. When I'm looking at here, I don't see the information that shows how many of these students went on to pursue a career or post-secondary path. Am I missing that?
Yeah, it's where you see ELA post-secondary and math post-secondary. That would be like, for example, let's look at level 2, because that seemed to be a level of interest. And what we said last week was not that every level was on track for college and career, but we were specifically discussing level 2 and our interest in getting kids up to level 2 so they could then go on to 3 and 4. But if you look at low level 2, you will see they have, if 90 or 91% graduation rate, they have 48 to 51% post-secondary education success, and then there's their ACT scores. Then you can look at the high end of level 2, and you see they have a 93 to 94% graduation rate. Depending on English or math, 60 to 64% post-secondary education success, and 19 to 20 score on the ACT. So what we were trying to describe last week was what Neil Kingston from KU, who does the assessments, was trying to describe level 2. And what he said was that these kids have the basics to go on. They are on track to move on to career and college readiness. And we agree with that. We just think you can't get to 3 and 4 till you get to 2. So right now, our emphasis is on helping the kids who are most in need get into 2. But this kind of data, the districts have found very helpful because they can actually identify individual kids with what they have in their database and say, gosh, you're so close, you know, let's get these kids over the line.
So I just to follow up, to clarify, because it's not very detailed in the definitions. You were saying if I look at a low 3 and I look at the ELAPS 69, are you saying 69% of those students pursue some kind of post-secondary path in the
that as your bill says, 2 years after high school, they have obtained what we define as post-secondary effectiveness.
I'm glad to see this because this is what I would like to see. I think this is a compliment to the report we saw last year, and I think that this is so important that we continue to know this and that we also have the whole numbers that it goes with, so we understand how we're doing. So there's requesting this as a compliment that I think it's very valuable information.
Well, we think it is too, and next year will be more sophisticated. So let's not write into law what looks good this year. Let us allow this to evolve into even better data for you every year. But if you put this into law, then we're stuck producing an old report that's outdated. Let's continue on to work together to provide what you want and what districts need. We'd be glad to do that.
And I don't think there's anything in my bill that would prohibit you guys from making it better, because I would love to see that.
But we're stuck producing what the bill asks for.
At a minimum, but thank you.
Yes,
All right,
thank you.
Representative Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm looking at this a little bit here, and if I'm understanding this right, so the low 1 and high 1 had 17% post-secondary success and 32% post-secondary success. Is that correct?
Now, they had, if you had, let's see, the green is ELA. If you were ELA post-secondary and you were in low 1, your post-secondary success rate was 17%.
Okay, so I'm a little bit confused. Do some people graduate only with only with ELA and only with math? I would assume that every student that graduates has both math and, why aren't those numbers identical through the thing?
Well, because they would have scored differently on math and English. Now, I can bring our
Just the
assessment folks
scores they hit
over.
on math and English, is that what it is? Or is this their post-secondary or their graduation rate? I thought those were graduation rates, not the scores.
72% is the graduation rate.
Yeah, so like in high one, you have 83%,
Oh, right,
83% ELA graduation, 82% math graduation. How can kids graduate? There's a 1% there that apparently didn't have math.
Well, I have to get our assessment folks over here, but I think what that means is the better you do in English, the better your chances are of graduating. But I'll have to get our guys over to
1% of the kids apparently.
See, here again, I don't have one of those, what do you call those charts, the regression charts, or however you explain it.
Short of my regression chart there. One thing that would be very helpful is if you would provide us the numbers that are in each of those categories, because this really doesn't mean anything if we don't know the numbers that are in each of those categories.
Sure, that's an easy step.
Okay, thank you.
Representative
One
Haskins.
more request, 41, although. I think we got 3 or 4 more yesterday, but we're happy to do it.
I'm 41. I resemble that remark. Representative Haskins.
I had something there, Mr. Chair, but I'm not going to say it. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for this opportunity. Ms. Ma, thank you for your testimony. I want to circle back because we make a lot of emphasis on college readiness, but we don't focus as much on career readiness. And I believe my colleague was hitting on that. And I'm just curious, if we just look at level 1, how many of those students go on to college and how many of those students go on and pursue a career?
Well, that's what the 17 and 16 numbers are. It's very low. That's why we call it limited. Your opportunity to succeed after high school is very limited if you're in one. And you can tell by the numbers. Even a high one, the percent effectiveness is only 32.
Okay, and so, but the 32 are students who go on to college or also in career?
Well, our definition of post-secondary success means either got an industry-recognized certification or an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree. And this doesn't break it down into which of those they got. They just said 32% of them met the goal.
Okay, so how many of the industry-recognized credentials since Senate Bill 155, have we seen an increase in that through that program?
I'm sure we have, but with COVID, particularly in 2020, kids just didn't go to school that fall, took a big hit. And so when that class comes around, it's really going to show. But I didn't bring those numbers, but I know
That's
Natalie
number
can
42
get 'em.
report for you to bring.
Wait a minute.
My last,
I'm taking notes. Thank you.
last question on this. It's been a while. So in 8th grade, do students have to identify a career plan, academic plan, CTE related, anything of that nature?
Well, one of the accreditation requirements is that by 8th grade, every student have an individual plan of study based on a career interest.
That's fine. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Representative Younger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ann.
Mm-hmm.
Is the military counted yet? Or are we still not?
No, I think we're talking to them about trying to gather that data, but they're still in a don't ask because we're not telling mode. I know that I will tell you, some small districts that are in my district, if they get to accreditation, and it looks like their accreditation is in danger, and in fact, now that you bring that up, we have conditionally accredited 11% of the schools since KISA started. So it is a tool that we use to hold them accountable. But I do talk to the smaller ones, like a lot of times they'll know if somebody went in the military. And we said, if your post-secondary success is going to keep you from getting accredited and you have extra information, you could bring that in. But we do conditionally accredit on results as well, but post-secondary success can be a problem.
So could you explain the conditionally accredited then a little more? What does that mean?
Sure. There are 3 things that we accredit on. One is the compliance, Okay, one is, do you have a procedure in place for continuous improvement? And the third one is results. Now, if you're out of compliance, we will say, hey, you're not in compliance in this area, and give you a chance to get in compliance. And that generally works, because if you're not in compliance, we will unaccredit your district. So the two big things that we conditionally accredit on generally are you have no process in place for continuous improvement, or you're not getting results, or a combination of those.
Representative Estes.
Representative Younger, I'm aware of the military problem and actually have connected my federal connection to Commissioner Watson, because the federal government is saying for privacy, they don't want to reveal who has and has not completed basic training. And we're saying, I think you could give us that information anonymously. So it's an issue that I think people are trying to resolve, because I think you obviously, even though it's a very, very small number, you want to give school districts credit for that in that path.
Further questions from the committee? We're good. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
No problem. All right, that is all the testimony I have on House Bill 2731. So we will close the hearing on that. Representative Estes.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we go to emergency final action to pass 2731 favorably. I think this report got talked about in a lot of different ways today about accreditation and so on, and that has really not the intention of this bill. What I'm looking is to have better data at hand and put contextual numbers to it so we can measure how we're doing. We've gone to a point where we have harder standards, we have a harder test. We have gone through COVID, and we're trying to pull ourselves up. We're turning to things like reading, the science of reading, and I think those things are going to have a wonderful impact. But for us to best understand the good and the bad of our decisions, having this report would be very, very helpful, so that we have a really good look at what we're doing and can use it to help us decide how we're going to change what we do moving forward.
All right, there's a motion on the table. Is there a second? Seconded by Representative Potter. Discussion on the motion. Representative Stogsdill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I couldn't vote for this at this point in time. I think we've heard some conflicting testimony today, and I think there's some things said that I would like to have further discussions about and see further information on. And I think this is too fast on a issue this important, and I would urge people to vote no on this at this point.
Very good. Further discussion on the motion. Representative Younger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would agree with that. I think this can be an important discussion, but I just think at the last hour is not the appropriate time. I'd rather have some time to process this, think about it, and really get into it a little deeper than right now. Thank you.
Representative Featherston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we've started a great discussion here. I think this committee is more thoughtful on things like this, and I think this is a great candidate for a bill to be blessed so that we can continue to be a thoughtful committee and continue the discussion.
Further discussion? All right, seeing none, I will allow you to close on your motion.
I closed.
Very good. You've heard the motion. This requires a 2/3 vote by the committee. Those in favor of suspending the rules and working this bill, say aye. Aye. Those opposed?
No.
The chair does not believe we have the 2/3 vote. It appears the motion fails. All right, very good. Committee, we have one bill I would like to work today. It was the bill we were talking about working yesterday. It's House Bill 2539. It is about the Promise Act and removing the residency requirement. So if it's okay with the reviser, I will turn to him to give us a rundown of that bill one more time.
As Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, House Bill 2539 did propose two amendments to the Kansas Promise Scholarship Act. The first amendment was to strike the requirements that the scholarship applicant be a resident of Kansas for 3 or more years prior to applying for a scholarship. The act would still require that the recipient work for 2 years in the state of Kansas after graduation, and would have to maintain that employment or be obligated to repay the financial assistance they received. The other amendment was to redefine part-time student to also include 5 credit hour certification programs in the definition of part-time.
Very good. Committee, discussion on the bill. I know I have one amendment that was brought. If we could get that passed out, then we'll discuss that. Then I will look to the reviser to explain the amendment.
As Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, if you'll turn to page 2 of the amendment, that's where the extent of the amendments occur. This would leave in the requirement that the applicant be a Kansas resident, but would still remove the requirement that they had been a resident for 3 or more consecutive years prior to applying for the scholarship. It would also remove the requirement that they have graduated from a Kansas high school. You'll see those strikes in lines 11 and line 16. And as such, then the exception for military service member dependents in lines 24 through 27 would no longer be needed if the requirement to graduate from a Kansas high school is removed.
Very good. Do I have a second on the amendment? Representative Schmoy with the second. Discussion on the amendment. Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A quick question for Jason. What is the current requirement for becoming a Kansas resident? I guess relating to the changes that are made on page 2.
I believe, and I would have to double check with the Board of Regents as to what their regulatory requirement is. It would most likely be just some proof that they had established a residence in Kansas by some documentation, but I'd have to double check with them.
Thank you.
Representative Hill.
Yeah, just a clarification on that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a clarification on that. Are we using, so this is referring to the Board of Regents definition of residency, or is it referring to statutory definition of residency?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, since the Board of Regents is administering this program, it would be up to the rules and regs adopted by the State Board of Regents as to what constitutes a Kansas resident. There is no reference in the act to any statutory definition of a Kansas resident.
Further discussion? All right, seeing none, I will move my motion and look for a second from Representative Schmoy. Those in favor of the amendment, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion passes. Bill is amended. We're back on the bill. Representative Partial.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have an amendment.
Very good. Would you care to explain the amendment while he's passing it out?
Basically, it would make it so anyone who would receive this scholarship would, the scholarship would only be paying the rate of in-state tuition, and that's what it would be charged. So the scholarship fund isn't eaten up by an out-of-state tuition.
I'll turn to the reviser and see if there's any other information we need to know about the amendment.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, that was an excellent explanation of the amendment. I will just point to the committee's attention that to do this policy requires bringing in another statute of the act. You can see that on the last page of the balloon. And you can see the in calculating the scholarship amount, it would be for the aggregate amount of tuition, required fees, and the cost of books and required materials for the promise eligible program at the eligible post-secondary educational institution for the academic year the student is enrolled in receiving the scholarship for a Kansas resident. And by adding that language in both paragraphs 1 and 2 would limit the scholarship amount to only the in-state cost amount when calculating the scholarship amount.
And I have a second from Representative Riley. Discussion on the amendment. Representative Haskins.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm not necessarily, I guess I just point of information on this is this seems pretty significant add, and I know that the Kansas Board of Regents was here to testify, and I just was curious why this wasn't added since it's related to what they awarded and if they have been in contact about this.
I'll turn to the maker of the motion.
I know we did speak with Jessica Lucas, correct, about the bill or the amendment, and they were in agreement with it, or she was, but she's with Cali County, so, yeah, so I don't believe they were spoken with.
Further discussion? Seeing none, Representative, you may close and renew your motion.
I close and move my amendment.
All right, those in favor of the amendment, say aye. Those opposed? Motion passes. Bill is amended. We are back on the bill. Further discussion on the bill. Seeing none, I will look for a motion to pass the bill out favorably as amended. Madam Vice Chair.
I move to pass the bill favorably. 2539 as amended.
Do I have a second? Representative Murphy. Any more discussion? Seeing none, those in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Very good. Motion passes. All right, committee, good work. It's not even 3 o'clock. This is our last day before turnaround, so I definitely want to thank the revisers. I want to thank Diane. I want to thank IT, everybody, and certainly you all. Love this committee. It's always been a joy, and we will see you next Wednesday is when we're back after turnaround. So, and I believe I will send out an agenda tomorrow. I think we have one bill so far that we're going to be hearing next week from the Senate side. So be ready. With that, we're adjourned.